Basically, the goal of today is exploitative thinking, and I came up with the idea for the masterclass today because I was preparing for it and I wanted to do something different than like just go over information that I played myself and what I would do in that formation and what I think people are doing wrong in that formation. I'll finish that series later, but I kind of wanted to do something different, something that I like doing as opposed to the my own database review, which I already kind of know. Like I've basically in all the database reviews that I've done, which is I don't know, like a few hundred, 300 or something like that by now. Yeah, like obviously I've basically said the same thing most of the times because people tend to have the same leaks, even in the team. And I want to do something completely different than that and just go into to a rabbit hole a little bit. And yeah, like so the goal is exploitative thinking. Basically, if you ask me, then this is the only way in poker it makes sense to think about poker. And I guess like most of you would agree here. Like not too long ago, what's his name, Jimmy, said something along the lines of, okay, the more I study, the more I feel like restrained. And so basically, this is mostly for Jimmy, and hopefully you guys can learn something from it as well. Because I feel like I was thinking this today, like I feel like best when I feel no restrictions at all, and I just play what I think is best in the moment. And obviously, that doesn't mean that I'm just going randomly going to click buttons because, like, I don't know, I feel like jamming, so I'll just rip it in here. There has to be a method to the madness, I think. But I think I win most basically. Like I've stretches where I default to more defensive play, and I try to play a reasonably well thought out strategy that is somewhat balanced. And then there are days where my inner Mihai is unleashing, and I feel just like doing all sorts of things that aren't technically solver proofs. But if you play around a little bit with the solver, then it might be like, and oftentimes I won't know, obviously in game, if my assumptions are going to be true, and if they are going to be true, then I'm not going to be sure that this is going to be the exploit that the solver will end up using, and we'll see like at least one hand where my exploit is at least debatable, and I think in hindsight might not be the best. But yeah, basically that's the goal of the session, to just do some funky stuff and try to come up with alternative solutions to seemingly very standard spots. And so I'm going to start off with one hand that I played not too long ago. I posted it in my blog at the time, and here it is. This is blind v blind. I had 3-bet preflop, which is fairly standard. Villain calls, I range bet the flop, I get check raised, and from there, basically the interesting stuff happens. My idea here was to sort of try to range villain, and so yeah, I'm not sure how we do that best. Let's try the chat first, and then maybe we can just give the mic to someone as well, or we could just give the mic to someone. Let's give the mic to, like, who wants to take the mic? Is there someone who wants to take the mic? What does villain check raises here on the flop? Like, give me some details on their range. Otherwise, I'll pick one.
I think I can do it, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure, go for it, man.
Yeah, so I think he's going to be check raising some flushes and some like weak 5x, mostly flushes. I don't think they're going to be doing like out of position should be doing that with some ace X, but I don't expect like people to do mergy races. So, like I said, flushes, maybe some draws, like um 7-8 with the backdoor flush draw, like straight draws. Yeah. So I think that 5 is in his range. Like he can have some 5x, and that's what I think. Maybe I'm missing a couple hands.
No, that's all good. Like, it seems reasonable enough. There might be, and indeed, there might be some like alternative backdoors that occasionally get check raised. There's an occasional 5x in there for sure. There should be a fair amount of ace x in there, and then like it's draws mostly. Nice. Okay, so we basically got a range. If I'm now going to make manual adjustments to that range, then I would say that most humans, and I can't speak for this guy, but seemed relatively basic up until then, especially on GG, are going to miss certain parts of the range a bit more, and on other parts a bit less. Yeah, kind of a basic bitch. Yeah. Again, and there are like a lot of players like this on GG, and this is no offense to him. I might have misread him. So like, I'm not sure who the guy is. I don't think I had like a ton of data, but up until then, I kind of felt like, okay, this is not the guy that is going to play this spot very, very well. This is the kind of guy that looks at his hands and sees 8-7 of diamonds and is check raising, but is not the kind of guy that is going to check raise ace-8 ever, or like 5-6 of hearts often enough. Maybe 5-6 of spades. Like if you have a backdoor, it's a bit more intuitive. But basically, some of the less intuitive check raises, I didn't expect him to get there with. So, but like we are not sure, right? We can't make any. Like I would, if you ask me, like, okay, bet 50% of your roll, your live roll, nah, that's like a bit much. Maybe is that good? I don't know. If you ask me, like, would you like, I don't know, like bet whatever 0.01% of your roll on it, I would say, okay, that's like I'm willing to risk that. So it's an assumption. I'm not sure. I can't prove it. And like there's some data that suggests that people are too equity driven in these spots. But yeah, like that's about it. And by the way, I should probably be check raising some lower pocket pairs like deuces with a diamond or whatever. Which I'm not sure if people find as often as they should either. All right, so we have arranged for our opponent. My decision on the flop is pretty standard here. I have a diamond to go with it. And basically, I think at this point, if we plan ahead a little bit, then our hand is mostly calling flop, potentially turn, but probably on the turn, like versus any bigger bet on like a bunch of turns, it's going to be indifferent or pure folding. And maybe on some we can still call. It's probably just going to be a pure fold by the river. Like probably not many situations in which we can pure call unless like 5 hits turn, 5 hits river or something like that. But mostly going to be like some sort of a bluff catcher that we have to release if he gets really, really aggressive. I click call, 5 of spades rolls off, and he goes in the tank here and bets 125. I think it's going to be relatively tough to play most parts of the range, right? If you have pocket nines, you probably want to think about a little bit about like, what does this card do to my range? Would I be betting my bluffs here? Am I going to be range checking here? Do I have the 5x as often as I should? Like, I'm not sure if he's aware, because like, yeah, I don't know. Asian rack, yeah, like going to assume that he's a bit weaker. So like, I can't guarantee that at this point that he doesn't have strong hands. That's not the point of my race. The point of my race is that I think there are a couple of things. Like basically, there are 3 things going on here. 3 parts of the range that are going to be playing imbalanced. And guess in the chat which parts those are. Kudos if you get all 3. But you just basically named the entire range. That's how you trust range. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So we got one specific one. Too many draws are betting. So that's one. I agree with that. The value range lacked turn trips. Yeah, that's. I think that's a very reasonable assumption to be making. I'll go a bit more in depth. I mean, draws are supposed to bet the turn. Yeah, and value range. Yeah. So okay. So yeah, that's okay. Now we're getting to. Yeah. Okay, we're getting into like the weeds a little bit. Basically, like Toby got like most of my thoughts in game. I was like, okay, it's pretty tough to check flush draws typically because it's really tough to play them versus a small stab, which you're going to face a lot. I don't think people are double check raising often enough. And I felt like this would be a board where he definitely isn't allowed to bet at a very high frequency. So I figured, okay, draws are going to be in equilibrium, checking more than what villain is playing. I agree, by the way, with Micha. I think what Micha is saying is like he should be betting his draws because no one is ever going to exploit that. Is that correct, Micha? Just yes or no in the chat is fine. But and I think I would agree. If I was villain, I would bet as well. I think just because people are not going to do something about it. So we have that. Then the value range is relatively thin. There's pocket nines and there's ace 5 suited. So there's like 5 combos. And then he should have some random combos of 5x. But I think people miss like the random 5 suit of hearts, 5 6 of hearts, and 5 4 of hearts and clubs. And so when the 5 rolls off, especially if it's the 5 of spades, which I could see people find a bit more often, I think we can discount the number of trips that they have quite heavily. Consider what we said. That's like the. I'll answer that question in a sec, and whether there would be merit in it. But like, let's first go into. That's exactly what it is. True. Let's first go into like the line that actually roll off, because like I think it's a fair point that you're making. Because I'm not sure if you would want to stab, like especially with our hand. I would never stab our hand, but like I could see myself not stab other parts of my range that I would normally stab on like other turns as well. Anyway, he bets. I think 5x, relax. I think flush draws is just so intuitive to bet that people might just overshoot a little bit here. He should be finding relatively thin value. In game, I was thinking, okay, he should be finding something like ace jack quite frequently. And we'll look at the sim in a sec, but basically he needs to go much wider than that. I think people are not doing that. I think especially on the turn like this, people are way more willing to check and think about what their hand wants to do in the moment, rather than like if you want to have a betting range here, you need some more than just chips plus or whatever. So yeah, those were my assumptions. I decided to raise, and like obviously that's like the least standard of all, I think. And maybe folding is like less standard, I guess, on the pairing turn. But like when we were on the flop and we called the c-bet, like there was no scenario where I thought like raising the turn would be a reasonable outcome. Yet now we're here, and it seems like a very cool play. We'll go into the sim, and then like sort of try to assess whether this kind of makes sense and what kind of assumptions need to be true for this to make sense. But regardless of what the sim says, I think this is basically when I feel like I'm playing best, is when I'm able to recognize data points that are relevant, when I'm able to use the GTO model to sort of assess, okay, these things need to happen, and I don't think these things are not happening. Therefore, I'm going to make a deviation here. And I think that's basically what makes the best players win. Like there are many players who I could quote on this in different forms, but one that kind of stuck with me was kind of recently. I'm not sure when or when it was said, but George basically said something along the lines of like the mediocre racks are trying to execute their strategy, the best racks are trying to win big blinds. And so whenever this happens, I'm well aware that what I'm doing here leads me open to being counter exploited, like running to all sorts of issues potentially. And it's definitely non-standard. But I'm not here to play something defensive where I kind of know, okay, if I do this, then it's the safe route and I'm fine. What I'm doing here is try to like max exploit villains' perceived mistakes based on understanding of the concepts. And if my understanding of the concepts that the solver is teaching me is better than my opponent's understanding of the concepts, then I might be able to do something like this and make money. Another thing I considered here is that I think the pool on GG is going to not 3-bet me often enough in general. So I think that they will make some mistakes there as well. I think that would make raising better. It's just not them not 3-betting, because like you can't call that often out of position there at this SPR. You just don't have the, by lack of a better term the room to do so. You just need to like rip it in and either win the pot or see a showdown. But you can be in a situation where I basically get to always choose, or quite often choose, if I realize all my equity and you don't. Obviously, there's like river leads that happen here if you do call. So like it isn't the end of the hand, but you definitely need to ship quite a bit at this SPR. All right, so let's see. Chat is going wild. So okay, yeah, cool. Oh, never mind. Sure. Sure. I'm not entirely sure. Anyway, I raised turn, villain called, check, and on river we have the most reasonable check back ever. I don't think villain is going to call a 9 there. I don't think he has a 9 ever. I think this is just going to be mostly either misdraw or an ace. I don't think it makes too much sense to try to get him to fold an ace. He could have ace queen, which he makes the mistake of not leading or whatever. Might not even be a mistake, by the way, but like yeah, that would, versus my hand it would be a mistake. So I check back and win the hand. And obviously like I've posted variations of this hand a couple of times in my blog. And yeah, like I'm not 100% sure and I wasn't at the time, and I'm still, to be honest, I'm still not, that this is going to be the line that yields the highest EV. I think there's a lot to be said for other lines as well. But this is the kind of thinking that I encourage everybody to to take on. Like if you're really trying to do everything that you can to win the big blinds, as George put it, then you are going to be making more unforced errors. That's just a fact of life. So to give you an example, today I had something similar where the guy 3-bet all in. I was like, okay, well, I just don't see the value. It's still relatively thin value range. It's ignition, so we'll flick it in. He had relatively thin value as well. So I was like, that's my reads were like, couldn't have been worse, basically. Like I thought he wouldn't be betting that on the turn, and then definitely wouldn't be ripping it in my face. So you are going to be making more unforced errors, but still, I think being able to be versatile with your thought process is basically the thing that makes the best players extremely tough to play against. Alongside, like obviously having crisp understanding of what needs to happen in equilibrium, and obviously there are going to be a ton of situations where, like, just looking at the sim will give you the vast majority of the information that you need. Think any defending line where basically villain is allowed to range bet, and you need to understand, okay, what is my response versus a range bet here? Like king eight deuce rainbow or whatever. Villain bets range. You're like, okay, that's not the kind of point where you're like, okay, what happens if I do a 15x raise here? That's not what I'm trying to advocate for. Or like, whatever happens if I lead? Like you can think about it, but probably is not going to yield any additional value to your win rate. In this case, I think they're, especially in lines like this, where the imbalance is partly due to a potential imbalance on the street before, and partly because like it's very unintuitive to play with a bunch of your range. And I think that a lot of people will make mistakes. This is the type of stuff where you want to, you want to go ham basically. If Venom was betting river a lot, would you do something different, like calling turn to call river? That's an interesting question. Probably, yeah. Like if he obviously if he's overbluffing the river, then yes. And I think like there's something to be said for that for sure. It's just on GG. I think the river here is going to be under bluffed because you will need to bluff diamonds or probably spades, by the way. Like more, I guess more spades than diamonds, but like you are going to have to bluff some hands that are relatively unintuitive, probably. So that makes it kind of a different story. And I'm not entirely sure if people do that. Whereas I do know that, and like one of the, basically the two things you have to weigh there. One is, okay, if I call, I basically give him free equity, whereas now I could charge him, versus if he just overbluffs on the river, I click call then and I make more. I think if you know that he's overbluffing, he's like a very spewy guy, or is just capable of bluffing in general, then I think calling here to call river is like probably the best. If your opponent is a bit more passive and so is more likely to miss the 3-bets and under bluff river or not bluff enough on the river, then I think something like this makes more sense. And the fact that I go for the raise here underlines the fact that I don't think I'm going to get a 3-bet very often here, even though I should probably, because the SPR is very shallow. And I don't expect him to massively overbluff the river. I've seen just like I said, seen more like as Micha put it, a basic bitch or something like that. All right, so I'm just going to go into the sim and then we'll take it from there, I guess. I've got like 20 sims open now. So let me see. So this is the turn already. That's the next one. Nice. So strategy. Like what can we say about this check raising strategy? So basically, kind of like we said, right? There's going to be some ace X. Like note that villain will need to find ace 8, ace 7 at some frequency, but mostly like ace 10, ace jack. Plus, I think people will, like, my guess is that they won't be check raising these often enough. Then there's some flush draws here, some air type hands that blocks flush draws. Once they hit, I think people will find these at some frequency. I could see this guy not finding these as often as he should, mostly because he's falling pre. By the way, these are not weighted, so keep that in mind. I'm not range betting here in the solve. I'm not range betting here in the solve, by the way. That's a good question, Toby, because otherwise Finland's check raising frequency is going haywire, and I didn't expect he would do that. So it's like pick your poison type stuff, because my range is now going to be stronger, which will have an influence on future suites as well. But otherwise, like I'm betting my entire range and villain is suddenly check raising like 30% or something like that, and then yeah, that didn't make sense to me either. So I went with this. I could note lock on the turn like my entire range, but I kind of kept it at this and sort of assumed that it was going to be relatively close to optimal. We can see there's very little three betting, which kind of makes sense on the ace high texture. There's not that much protection type stuff. Maybe if we give it a smaller click back size or something like that, because like the size is quite large here, but whatever. But yeah, anyway, like check raising. So like stuff like this kind of makes sense. All these ones are a bit less intuitive, I think. And then I think like the spades are for whatever reason more intuitive to humans than the other ones. And I could see like an average Chinese, sorry, yeah, Hong Kong, I guess, but yeah, sort of Chinese rep not finding these as often. Basically, I expect them to under check raise here. And I think the stuff that gets cut first is like weak ace X, some 5X, and maybe some vector type stuff that people are not finding as often. So 5 of spades hits. This is what villain should do in equilibrium when he has all the 5X. And we can see there's some bigger bets, some smaller bets, but mostly it's going to be smaller. And then if we face a small bet, then we are very seldomly raising, and it's going to be with a relatively strong range. Our hand is just a call. So we could look at this and then say, okay, well, I guess I'm not allowed to raise ace 4 here, and like the raise is all in, so like we could probably give it a smaller sizing, and that might happen a bit more often and with some more ace X. But for all intents and purposes, let's just assume that this is the only option that we have. We could just say, okay, well, like raising is never going to be a thing. Just basically call and move on with life. But yeah, like let's just do some node locking. And so that's what we did here, I think. So here I removed, wait, is this the right one? Yeah. So I removed the 5-6 basically, because there's just the 5-6 of spades, sorry, of clubs and hearts. Jesus, took me a while to figure out what the last suit was. Clubs and hearts, I removed those 6-5, 5-4. And then let's see here. We can see that like I removed some more less intuitive bets out of the ace highs that are betting. So a7 betting less often, ace8 betting less often. You can see here in equilibrium that those get actually bet quite frequently. And then like ace10 a bit lower, ace-x actually more often here, but ace-queen less often, some sort of solver anomaly thing. I changed the rate, the sizings also a little bit, so I have a small sizing, so that will have an influence as well. And then let's look at what villain needs to do. So we'll go Control R. We can say flush draw. You can see he needs to check like basically 2/3 of the times, which is obviously quite tough, right? Good luck finding that. Because like the most intuitive way to play this is just bet small. And if you bet small, you basically like quite likely you will overrealize. Like I think if you ask him, he might even agree in the moment, right? If I had to play it, I would probably bet small as well, because I think I'm going to overrealize. I think my opponent is like, if I bet most of my flush draws here, is not going to punish me for it, basically. So yeah, like I think the best course of action for the in position player is punish the out of position player, and then like when we are the out of position player, just bet small still and hope that you don't get punished. I think that's a more reasonable strategy than check a whole bunch and decide, because I don't think people will punish you for it. So what I did is I increased the amount of flush draws. So now it's basically checking 40%. So not even all that big of a difference, like 20% points roughly. It's not the most extreme difference. Like I think in reality it's more like 70% bet and 30% check or something like that. But usually what I want to do and stuff like this is either go with something conservative or go with something very extreme, and usually both, and then sort of see how that changes the model. And we'll do that in the last hand for sure. We can do it here a bit later as well, by the way. All right, so relatively conservative model. He's still going to be betting ace-10 sometimes. He's actually still betting his ace-8, ace-7 occasionally, which I don't know if people are doing that. I kept like the 9-8 in there, which I don't think people are betting, to be honest, but I don't think the people are check raising these either. So could have just as well removed them, I guess. But and then I gave him too many flush draws. Any adjustments that you guys would make here to the range, or does it seem reasonable? The merge, so in other words, like betting them seems, yeah, okay. That seems like it seems more reasonable to me, but that would like one thing I think those are fair assumptions to be making, to be honest. I think people are just checking. It is a 3-bet pot blind, 3 blind, yeah. So I think you guys are right. I don't think it's at all reasonable to expect the majority of ace-10 of clubs here to be betting. That seems relatively unreasonable to me as well. But we'll make some changes later then. What we'll do is like we'll say, okay, let's go with something conservative. This is like basically our worst case scenario. Actually, I think I looked at this in the solver and might be, by the way, like I just created something simple because he went with quite a pot. I give him 50 as well. Like I think that's another thing like what we could consider, right? Like, okay, he goes quarter pot here. Is he going to go quarter pot with ace jack or ace queen, or is he just going half, right? That's like a reasonable question. I think you can go both here. What is worth? Which is yet another like probably a reason to read into this. Whenever people are allowed to use multiple sizes, I think usually that means that they are unbalanced one way or another. Nice. So this is let's assume that like this is like a less extreme model, and we're just going to take a worst case scenario where slightly more flush draws, slightly less value basically, and then see what happens. And then we can see now the solver wants to raise quite a bit, and yeah, like basically a lot of like mergey protection type stuff, and like basically all sorts of things going on, but a lot of mergey protection type stuff. Here I already note logged some a lack of gems. Still, I think like people are not finding these, for instance, right? 8-7 maybe they find. I'm not sure. Like we saw in my hand that he didn't, but doesn't need to find them always, obviously. Like some flush draws maybe. And then finding like the ace X, probably not. Like these ones, probably not at the right frequency. So yeah, I could see people making mistakes here for sure with the ace X region. And I think we already looked at it a little bit, by the way. So like if we now draw conclusions out of this, we can say, okay, not the worst idea that I had. And it kind of makes sense with my hand class. I'm not really too worried about, I don't know, ace 4 versus ace 3. Yeah, I'm not sure like why I would be, to be honest. All raise sizes. Yeah, so actually we can. I would just need to basically build this again. And then we'd have to node lock again, but that's fine. So basically what we can do is we can say, okay, do it like this. And then we can see, oh, wait, it's not build tree. Oh, no, it's out of position, sorry. Oh, that's build tree, go. What am I doing wrong? Oh, fuck, turn. Okay, yeah. Thanks, guys. So it wants to just share, which is fair, I guess. There is no, like, this is not node locked. So what we can do is we can just say, okay, we have done our like very modest node lock. Let's now go with something more extreme. So first of all, I think we'll still remove like the 6, 5, and 5. Oh, those are still removed. Okay, cool. That makes sense. Strategy and log nodes. And we will first like put like the flush draws on like 80% or something like that. Something, like I said, a bit extreme. Might be like we can definitely argue that that's a bit too extreme, but let's just go for something extreme. So I'm mostly going to be betting. All right, so strategy and log nodes. Then we're going to say top pair is just going to be checking much more often. So if we now look at the range, there's still some ace-10 offsuit in there, ace-queen. So I'm just going to drag this further, 80%. Seems a bit extreme, right? Like, I don't know. It seems a bit extreme, but whatever. We'll go with the extreme one. Yes. Look. Yeah, I guess something like this. We still seem to jam, which is kind of cool. We do have some small raises still with like this region, and this stuff kind of wants to jam. So that's pretty cool. It kind of makes sense. Now, one argument for not jamming is, this is quite a large raise, by the way. Still, it's like, well, we'll do it like this. It's like, let's say villain is not full, but it's just calling more, right? It's just jamming 20% or something like that. So now raising small a bit more often, but still jamming. These get in there a bit more now, which is kind of cool. Some 9x's in there. Kind of what we want to do now, I think, is ask ourselves, okay, we basically looked at a couple of different models. We made some assumptions. Is this a reasonable thing to do in game? I'm not 100% convinced, to be honest. I think a couple of things need to be true for raising to make a fair amount of sense. And one of them is, okay, we don't expect them to be 3-betting very often. Also, we don't expect them to be bluffing very often on the river. If we are playing versus, like I said, the aggressive regular, or by chance on a turn where I think there's just going to be more bluffing on the river, just as a function of how I expect the turn to be played or whatever, then I think calling makes more sense. I think versus this guy in this spot, raising is a pretty reasonable way to go about it. Apparently, I'm still indifferent even versus this player, so yeah, take of that what you will, but seems like a reasonably cool line. All right, any questions? Any suggestions? Anything you guys want to say about this hand? Otherwise, we just move on to the next one. Yeah, like I already have like a very cool meta, but a bunch of direct. I guess like if like there one thing we should consider, which I usually don't do because I'm not too well versed at playing in known pools, is like how are people going to perceive me, right? And I think people are going to perceive me as spewy, unbalanced, tries to win pots. If they know my name, which I'm assuming most people won't, to be honest, but in case they do, they've seen a Ronald Bonds video or something like that, then that's definitely, I think, what they will default to. And then if I just base it on my heart, they will probably see something similar. Yeah, like that's something to take into consideration as well, I guess. We'll go next hand. Seems at least like food for thought type one. Then we go to a hand that I played this morning. I actually have one more hand, but that's not in my tracker, so I have to find it. Actually, I think we went over it already in the stream. Otherwise, I have a hand that I played this morning that's kind of similar. But kudos to Michai for the line, by the way. GG. Oh, yeah, okay. Other hand that I played, actually, that didn't play it today. I played it a couple of days ago, which is this one. I'm just going to give you my thoughts here, and then we'll go into a sim and basically take it from there. So my thoughts in game. This is cutoff versus big blinds, 2.2x. I call. Flop goes check check. Turn is a 3. Board doesn't like basically. I think we don't really have that many bets here on the turn. Our global betting frequency is going to be around 30%, maybe in like low 30s on this node. I think this texture will be something similar. And I think we want to go polar. I don't really have too much incentive to be betting, like weak pairs very consistently. I basically want to carve out betting range that is like a strong jack and better, and then take it from there. That's something that usually happens on like dry disconnected textures. It just basically plays the same as like I don't know, like some like at least we play the same strategy as some like ace high texture or whatever. Why not betting when we okay? So a bunch of different questions. So why not bet if we know that's an overfolded node? That's a reasonable way to go about it, I think. I think that's a reason to typically bet a bit more than the global frequency. It's at least something that I would do. So there's that. I think it definitely makes sense to be betting a bit more than you normally do on this node. I don't go as crazy as just like bet everything. This is like a reasonable bet for what it's worth. It's also a reasonable check raise. So I decided to put this in my check raising line now. I don't think betting this hand in itself is going to be a mistake. I think people on Ignition will still overfold, even though not massively. I think at high stakes, the overfolds will be somewhat minimal. And so like increasing your betting frequency somewhat is reasonable, but I don't usually do it with like extreme. I don't go too extreme here. And when I say big bet, the way I usually play this is like on try disconnected textures like this, I go over bet and check. On let's say the turn is a 3 of hearts, I would go bet 75 or check. Although you could probably go small as well and you don't lose that much EV. And then like on more low textures, I go quarter pot, and then I definitely bet too often. So basically I bet more often on textures where I already have a naturally high betting frequency on, and then on the ones where I don't really have that big of a betting frequency, I may be betting a touch more often. Anyway, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So like I think that's like a very reasonable stance to take. Like if you just say, okay, I'm just going to overbet here most of the times, especially with this hand, then yeah, all the more power to you. I don't think it's a mistake at all. As long as you're aware that like you need to have some of these hands in your check raising range. Yeah, like kind of want to, you kind of want to have hands like this. Like you don't want to be in a situation where river is 7 of hearts and you don't have a bluff that's printing or something like that. So anyway, I just go for the check. Villain bets 2/3. I raise pot size. Villain calls, and then the jack rolls off. And basically, like going check raise on the turn with maybe ace jack as my bottom, whereas villain is probably bet calling most jacks here. So you don't need to be a wizard to sort of understand. Okay, I like all my draws don't get there. My value range is really thin here, and villain's range just massively improved. So decided to range check basically, and then villain bets 2/3 ish, and I go a little bit in the tank, and I decide to call. And then the reason why I called in game, I'll go over that in a little bit, is because I suspected that a couple of things were true. So for one, I suspected that villain wouldn't be betting as many weaker jack X for this sizing, which was like not entirely sure about that read, but seemed like fairly reasonable. Like on those nodes where they can choose their own sizing, usually they're a bit unbalanced. But like that's like a thin one. And then the other one was I sort of expected villain not to be allowed to bluff all bluffs. I expected him to be able to bluff most bluffs, but I didn't expect him to bluff all bluffs. Also, I don't expect villain to ever value bet thinly. I don't think he should, by the way. I didn't think that he should in-game, but I didn't think that would happen. And I think villain isn't going to be bluffing too many hands, if any, that I beat. I thought about it for some time, and I ended up calling. And we'll go in a sim in a sec, but let's go into the questions here. So, for example, this one's pretty good call, but also villain uses the standard bet 75 button. He actually didn't on the turn. It was 2/3 and has all the missed stuff. Would you have called bet 30, bet 90, bet 150 all in? I see this bet 75 as a big call data point. I think combos blocks his draws. How relevant is that? I think that's a very good point. I think one thing to consider is that I don't think that 9-10, Queen 10, and flush draws are going to check the flop as often as they should. So like that's something that I would consider as well. I don't think people are checking the flush draws as often as they should. So like having a heart is probably okay here, I think. Yeah, I think it would be okay. The queen is kind of whatever, and I don't beat queen 10, which is kind of annoying. So yeah, I ended up calling, and in game I knew like this is not going to be a thing, and Equilibrium I think I would be like kind of moronic to think that this is going to be a thing. But I expect that Finland needs to check back sometime like 5-6, maybe 5-6 is betting. Like some weak stuff. I think like he is allowed to bet his air like 80% of the times on this note, and I think it's very easy to just go 100%. And so I decided to call this. I will go into the sim. Yeah, like that's definitely a fair point. Like one thing to so let's say he goes and bets 80% and bet 75 is standard, then like data just suggests like that is a very important data point. Data just suggests it's going to be stronger. Right? People are greedy by nature. So when he goes bet 75 and then ticks it up two notches, you're going to be like, okay, basically he's doing that more often with Jack 10 than he's doing that with air. That's just a fact. And we can literally see that in the data. Like most sizes are relatively balanced. Like the size that is, let's say, the least balanced is 80 to 90% pot in that region. Usually it's like not like a massive difference, but you can definitely notice the difference. And we can see it on like the global betting frequency as well. So like any bet that Willem makes, if he chooses to go slightly bigger than medium sizing, it's usually because he wants to win slightly more money. So, but he goes 2/3 here, so he uses a slightly smaller sizing. And yeah, I don't know. Like I didn't read too much into that. I think like it makes sense to have like a 2/3, and probably you want to have a overbet here as well. All right, we'll go into the sim. Spoiler alert: it was not a good call, and I really tried to make it a good call. Not for the sake of like proving my point, by the way, but just like again, like I wanted to see if I take like a reasonable approach here. Is it going to be a call? No, it's a fold. What if I take an extreme approach? And like I said, spoiler alert, it was not a thing. So here we are on the turn. I didn't change too much here. I just like started off the turn. I went with overbet and check. I think I have the base sim open as well somewhere. Yeah, this is Equilibrium. So this is what Equilibrium looks like. Betting about 30% overbet and check. And then Willem will go and bets his medium size mostly. So I simplified this, cut off the flop. So we have the turn only. And then I went with an overbet and check for me. And 2/3 for Willem because that was the sizing that he picked. So you can see here. I didn't note look any of this. So I think people are not betting their Jack 5, let's say 70% of the times. I don't think they're betting their Jack 6 always. So I think it's pretty likely that Willem doesn't have as many 6x. And I think like there's a lot of stuff that we could put in here. Like probably he doesn't check the flop as often with flush draws and stuff like that. But basically I didn't do that. Like we could do that still, but I just sort of accepted, okay, well, let's just assume that this is somewhat correct. We go for the check raise. Like for what it's worth, our hand wants to bet very often. And if we face a bet, then it just wants to check raise. We had queen of spades, 9 of hearts. Let me take a sip because my throat is. So basically it's that type of hand that really wants to force folds by villain, right? Whenever you see something like this, like the way I usually go about figuring out which hands want to raise or which hands are more inclined to check is by trying to sort of visualize the rest of the game tree for a hand like Queen 9. Like Queen 9 has like a ton of other draws, by the way, but like Queen 9 doesn't really get the showdown and wins. So the checking EV is very, very minimal. Like you could say showdown value is very little. Like the problem with like saying it like that is that every hand still is equity. So that it doesn't take everything into account, I think. But let's say showdown EV is pretty low. We basically, the branching of the game tree where we just check down and win is non-existent. And so this makes it a bit more likely to use as some sort of a race or as a semi-bluff. Basically, like if we take something like ace ten of hearts, it never wants to raise, even though it has presumably more equity. or never wants to bet here, simply because turn goes check, check, river is a 3. You can check call the river, basically. So that's one. The other one is we have nutted equity, which is kind of nice. And then the third one is that we want to have some single hearts on hard runouts, because we're going to be struggling to find bluffs otherwise on those runouts. So that's basically a hand that got a ton of things working for it, as like all of these hands. So you want to be betting them very often. We don't have that many like weak gutters, but like if we do, like let's say 9-7 makes a non-nutted straight, and since it's a pretty deep SPR, we are not really too incentivized to like bloat the pot here very much. Now villain calls in position, and now we're in a situation where on a 10 there are 16 combinations of not 16 actually, because like sometimes he's betting, but like there's a fair amount of combinations where villain has like a slightly better hand and then we lose an entire stack. Basically you want to have the slightly better hand. Assuming that most of you know this, but still pointing this out. So anyway, we face the bet, we go for the raise, which is fine. We know that the pool is overfolding here based on the data, which is like another reason to sort of mix it up a little bit on the turn, I think. Is just try to put them in spots where we know that they're going to be making mistakes. So betting a bit more is reasonable. I think at 1K people will be pretty decent at defending there. I think like finding these check raises is pretty cool as well. So we do villain calls. You can see he's mostly calling his jack X, which I expect the pool to do. I actually don't expect too much from overfold here. I don't think these are in there very often. I think one of the problems that they face is that they don't have this as often as they should, and therefore are overfolding. That I could see happening. But yeah, anyway, we raise, call, and then check rolls off and solve a range checks. Yeah, I think so. I think everyone knows that check check is a universal hotspot. I think again, like I don't want to be too like this is exactly the type of thing that I tell people not to do. But I think it is quite likely that on some textures I will get exploited by people who check random jack X, pocket nines, pocket tens, 8x, stuff like that too often to sort of click call twice versus guys that are probing too often. So yeah, like I think that's a reasonable stance at 1K. And like I said, I don't expect this to be super overfolded. I don't necessarily expect it to be over defended either, unless it's like ace nine deuce rainbow, where like okay, well you could have range bet here. Not range betting doesn't make you any more money. So I kind of feel like your range is weighted towards kings that calls twice, or like ace five or something like that. But again, like that would still be an assumption. What do you think is the imposition value threshold on this node when I use that test? So personally, like there's a difference between what I would do and what I think the pool is going to do. What I would do is I would probably use this sizing for something like pocket nines and better. I think that's on the thinner side, to be honest. I'm not entirely sure, but like basically what I'm doing on the turn there is I'm going to assume that people are not going to be check raising me often enough and are quite likely overcalling. I could see myself go 3/4 and then overbet the river with any check. Yeah, and maybe like 3/4 and normal bet river with pocket nines or something like that. So I'll go relatively thin here, knowing that that the pool's not check raising me often enough. I think pool will probably not go with nines and tens, and might, like I said, might not find every weak jack in there as often as the solver does. I think they might just go smaller or just check it a bit more to just have an easy call in the river. That would be my assumption. So I'm not entirely sure what the solver set to do. So yeah, he actually goes and that's these. These ones are actually ones that I might not find. So maybe I'm actually not going as thin as I think. Although, well, no, actually, as Fred said, I'm going to find these as well. That's relatively wide formation. And people are just calling ace highs here on ignition. So I'd go relatively thin for value, I think. Let's see if ace four I wouldn't find. I'll just check and call river, I think. Yeah, I'm not sure people find 8x, to be honest, as often as they should on the turn. I think it's a relative, like, I think in general, this is a spot where people, as the out of position player, are going to be pretty unbalanced in a couple of different ways. So for one, I think they're going to be too equity driven when they bet themselves, and therefore don't really have check raises as often as they should. And that's going to make it so that you want to bet thinner for value. Basically, the range is kind of unprotected, in my opinion, and so you want to be thinner for value, which is basically what I would do. Yeah. I think Toby's right. By the way, I think we should probably find all 8x on Iggy, because I still think guys on Iggy aren't going to check raise often enough on this node. And note, by the way, that here it's just 5% that they need to find. But if we give it multiple sizes, is this the one with multiple sizes? Oh, that's a different. Oh, that's the river. Okay, we'll go copy. I will be fast now because I gotta pick up my kids. It turns out 2 hands was more than enough. What we'll do is I'll give imposition multiple sizes and we'll see. And we'll give it one is 66. There is one overbet, is it true? Yeah. So one overbet, oh no, 175, one, what isn't it correct? What did I do? Imposition turn. That is river getting fucked. Jesus Christ. Here, we'll give it a couple of different sizes. Oh, fuck, okay, I get it. Ah, Jesus, okay. 3, create sub 3. No, apparently I can't. All right, so this is the river. We'll go here. Okay, we can go here, actually, and we already have it. So when there's like a bigger bet, then obviously like some of the stronger hands are going to be in the bigger going in the bigger bet more often. So then you'll see usually some more raises. So it was 5, now it's 7. Yeah, I still think that people won't find that as often as they should, by the way. But anyway, we go to the river where we would need to range check, which I think is fair. And now the question is Villain going to be bluffing enough and value betting not enough for us to justify a call here? So I'm just going to make sure that we notebook this. Sorry, we unnotebook this. So here we are with the GTO strategy. And we can see Villain is allowed to, it should be checking back Jack X, which is really bad for bluff catching, I think, in our shoes, right? Because if Villain is not value betting, is value betting thinner than the sim, then obviously that's not going to be good for bluff catching. Queen 9 is losing about 4 big blinds. So, okay, I guess we can go into like the most extreme, I'm not sure what it's called. Trips, oh yeah, obviously. So we can just say, okay, trips, like that's not happening, right? Like people are just value betting your trips there. I think it's a reasonable assumption to be made, especially on ignition. Like people are just not checking back there. They're just betting. They might go smaller, but they're just going to be betting. Another thing that I think we want to see is, okay, let's say Villain has queen high or worse. He needs to be betting 70% and checking 0. What we can do is we can say, okay, well, let's assume that he just has all the Jack X. And then besides that, make it like the best possible scenario for us. So he's never checking queen high or worse, except for maybe queen 10, which would be in our favor. So we'll just give ourselves that. Queen 10, let's say, is always checking. So we beat all bluffs. Like a very extreme example, I don't think this is fair. But if we don't have a bluff catch in this example, then we are already sort of in murky territory. And then you can see there's some 4x that randomly wants to bet, some sort of value bluff, I think, where we check fold worse and check call better or something. Sorry, check fold better, call check fold worse. Sorry, check fold better and check call worse. Yeah, okay, got there. I would also put full house and strong Jack X in the bigger sizing. That's like a reasonable assumption to be making. That's actually one that I didn't think of. So what we'll do indeed, that's actually a very good point, is like trips like that. Just full house. Okay. We are going to say, okay, he is never checking those, right? But he is simply going to be using bigger sizes mostly. So what we'll do is we'll lower the smaller sizing so that there's still some with like the weaker Jack X, but he will naturally just pick like the best sizes for each bigger bet, basically. So that's like a reasonable assumption. I forgot about that. That's a good point. Maybe we get the call now. All right, and ace 4 will remove, right? Ace 4 seems like a spot where then it's just going to check back and realize and not do that weird value bluff stuff. Now, well, maybe we can still, maybe we still get the call. We'll click go. So this is like a best case scenario. It's a good point, Michael, I understand. We just go all in. We don't ever call. Like, let's see what are the EVs for calling. Minus 10 big blinds. What if we just go a bit more extreme and then read later on? We'll just say top of the range, like trips, he's just never using small sizing. Let's just go with like the most extreme scenario and just say, okay, well, this is never happening. It's just always going to be an overbet or a jam, which obviously is not happening, but let's see. Still holding. Need to set 50 sizing. Oh, do we need to? Oh, fuck, sorry. Oh, okay. Yeah, okay, cool. Now we always call. Kind of. Now I fucked up the sim completely. That makes sense. I need to actually wait. Let me do this one more, but then good. Yeah. So there's no. Let's just, okay. Full house trips. We are going to reduce this sizing and basically given something like this. And there's still going to be some betting for small, but whatever. Something like this, and we'll go bet 75. That's okay. I'll do it like this. Still like a pretty extreme, but whatever. You can already see like if you this is going to be relatively sensitive, I think. Now we just go always. So you can see I made a profitable call. It's kind of annoying I have to run up because I promised to pick up the kids. But like that's a very good point that Micha made that I didn't think of when I note blocked it, which kind of makes me think that this is maybe better than it looks like. I'm just going to do it once more. So really quickly in 10 seconds, never checking. Okay, place action, third pair, always checking. Flips, full house, quads, over pair. We are going to say that let's just basically never check, and then cut this, go this to like 15. I don't think there's too many. Please lock this one to 25, lock, and then rest is over betting jam. Like it kind of doesn't make sense to do it like this, but we're missing some sizes basically. We'll do it like this and see what happens now. So now it's actually cool. Interesting. I'm not entirely sure, to be honest. I gotta run off, so it's kind of annoying. I think the two main thing here is if he's unbalanced with a c-bet flop strategy where he wants don't check up stuff, unbalanced and river sizing your call would be profitable. Many ifs, but who knows? Yeah, like I think this is the key. Like I'm not entirely sure. Like there's a lot of ifs here. If we go and compare the two hands, then in both I made an exploitative play. But here there's a lot more risk involved because we could argue that on ignition there's actually more jack X in the range, and then and a little bit less of like the 5-6 type stuff because there's just an incentive to be c-betting that a bit more than the jack X. So if I could go back, I think I would probably play the first hand the same or call, but I think like first this player playing it the same is fine. This one, I have no idea if it's profitable. Like there's a lot of reason to believe it's not, and there's like we need to give it some very extreme inputs in order for this to be a thing. It could be like I think like it's a reasonable assumption to make that like people are just not betting 66% with like this combo very often, but who knows? All right, so like the point stays valid here, and the point is like the key point here is that you need to try to win big blinds. So you need to try to think outside of the box and occasionally make a spew. And if we conclude now that this is a spew, I can live with that. And I think it's fine. Like I'll happily make a spew or two every now and then. Like the goal basically is to make less spews than your opponent, I think, rather than just try to make less mistakes than your opponent and try to make more solid exploits versus your opponent. Let's do it like this. If you guys have any questions, can we have a part two? I'm happy to do a part two. Yeah, like there's like one very cool hand that I played not too long ago where I basically I do it quite often where I go check call, check call, check raise, which I think is a really cool line as well, especially versus this sizing. So basically same thing, but I'm happy to do a next one sometime soon. I'll maybe in 2 weeks because I got like the playbook to make next week, but maybe if I feel like I can do that relatively quickly, maybe then next week. We'll see. Guys, I'm gonna pick up the kid. Cheers. Bye bye. Later.